Hello and welcome to this edition of Assembly Calendar. I'm Ed Visscher. Our guest today is New York State Assemblyman Phil Palmesano. Phil represents the 132nd Assembly District, which encompasses the counties of Steuben, Yates, Schuyler, Seneca, and Chemung counties. Thank you very much for joining us today. We are, as of this taping, in the second week of March, and we are fast approaching the April 1 deadline, and all eyes are turning to of course, the passage of an on-time state budget. And we'll certainly get an update from the Assemblyman on that. But first, always nice to see you, sir.
Good to be with you.
Yes, beautiful day here in Albany as of this taping, 70 degrees, unbelievable. I am aware that you had a really nice event that you attended today, a topic that is that you are personal about and advocate on behalf of over the past couple of years. And that is for CHIPS funding, which is the acronym CHIPS stands for, please fill me in.
Consolidated Highway Improvement Program. It's funding that goes to our local communities, municipalities to fix their local bridges and culverts. It's a direct aid right to them so they can make the decisions on how best to spend that money for the residents of their community.
And you held the press conference this morning, actually, as of this taping, March 9th. And we are going to go ahead and roll that clip, and then we will come back and discuss a little more in detail about the CHIPS funding with Assemblyman Phil Palmesano.
This has been a 4-year effort. We have 130 signatures on this letter that's going to the governor and legislative leaders. 91 members in the Assembly, 39 members in the Senate, bipartisan effort on both sides, and we can't do it without that support. And certainly the orange you see behind us, to the men and women who are here representing towns and villages and cities across the state, we thank you for what you do. We come with 3 specific asks with this letter and this proposal we're asking to the governor. Number one, we're asking for parity between the MTA and the DOT capital plan that has always been done. That it has always been the history of this legislature and governor's past. Since 2010, the MTA and DOT capital budget have been equal. That did not happen in 2010 and is not proposed to happen this year. We need to make sure that does happen, and that's one of our top priorities. The other important priority, something we've talked about for the past several years, is funding our local infrastructure, our CHIPS program. We're asking for a $250 million increase in the CHIPS program to restore the $50 million that the governor cut as part of the winter recovery program, and a $200 million increase to propose to increase funding for our local roads and bridges, and a 4-year state aid to local bridge and culvert program that has local control with this decision-making process. People might ask where this money is going to come from. We collect nearly drivers pay nearly $5 billion in taxes, fees, and assessments, but yet only about $2 billion of that is going into the dedicated fund and used on infrastructure. We have over $2 billion still left in settlement funds that can be used to disperse. And the governor gets it. He has he has in his budget $1 billion for Pave New York. Half of that's assigned for local roads. We believe that should go into the CHIPS program because that would go right to the local communities that would help reduce local property taxes, and a $1 billion Bridge New York program. So we want to use that money for that.
A lot of numbers thrown out there, Assemblyman, but basically the governor has proposed to maintain this year's total CHIPS funding at $438 million. You're essentially asking for a couple hundred more than that?
Well, in essence, there's a $50 million, based on his budget, the locals will get $50 million less than they did last year because he's taken away $50 million that went through the CHIPS program for winter recovery because of the harsh winter. We're asking for that money to be restored through the CHIPS program, through the CHIPS-based aid, plus a $200 million more. That money is in the budget because, as I said in the press conference, the governor has proposed a $1 billion Pave New York program, $500 for state, $500 to use for our locals. We believe that $500 million should go through the CHIPS program because then it provides that money directly to the local community. So the local highway superintendents can make a determination on what's best for their town, their village, or city, or county. We think that's the fair way to do it. And with the property tax cap and declining revenue, we believe that's a form of mandate relief. It's property tax relief for sure because every dollar we spend in CHIPS is one less dollar that the local property taxpayer has to spend. The Bridge New York program, same thing. We're asking for local control and decision making, not for Albany to make the decision, but put together a program or a formula that drives that money to the local municipalities to deal with a bridge and culvert program because there's tremendous need there. And another big component of this is parity. The MTA, the governor and the Mayor de Blasio proposed a $26 billion MTA program. I'm not saying the MTA is not important. I understand it's the lifeline for down in the city in the MTA region. But I would say CHIPS is the lifeline for many of our upstate rural communities, particularly because sometimes that's the only money they had to fix their local infrastructure. So we're asking parity between the 5-year MTA plan and the 5-year DOT capital plan. And let me just tell you, CHIPS, the DOT capital plan is a statewide, so it does impact New York City, it does impact Long Island, it does impact downstate, but it has a major impact on us upstate as well. And traditionally, that had been funded equally prior to 2010. The governor and the legislative leaders have always funded those programs equally. 2010, that did not happen. So over that 5-year period from 2010 to 2015, the MTA was funded at $5 billion more than the DOT capital plan, which was wrong. The governor's proposing a $26 billion plan for the MTA, but only $20 billion for the DOT capital plan. And we just believe that's not parity. So we're asking for parity. If that happens, then we'll be able to fund these infrastructure projects. But we believe the money's there because I talked about the Bridge New York program and the Pave New York. There's $1 billion each for there. $5 billion in driver's fees and assessments. No one wants to pay those fees and assessments and gas taxes and sales taxes on the automobiles, but I think people would expect those funds to go to improve their local infrastructure. They're buying the gas or driving on those roads. That can help that. And again, we have over $2 billion in settlement funds that can be used to pay for this. So we're trying to build a coalition, and let me tell you, 130 legislators signing on to a letter is almost uncalled for, unheard of up here. And it's bipartisan support. We have 91 members in the Assembly. We have 49 Democrats and 42 Republicans. We have 11 Democrats and 28 Republicans in the Senate. It's bipartisan support. This is not, in my opinion, not an upstate or downstate issue. This is a common sense issue, and people want to make sure their local infrastructure is taken care of. And oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So no, that's so. At this point, how optimistic are you that the governor is going to heed the call to increase funding?
Oh well, if you saw, had people looking at the Capitol, we had a sea of orange. There was over 700 highway superintendents from across the state here today wearing orange. I have my orange tie on today. We just believe it's common sense. Listen, if the governor cares about economic development, investing in the CHIPS program is economic development because that money goes to the local community. They hire a local contractor who hires local employees. That helps the local economy. Tourism. How many ads have we seen about I Love New York? What kind of message are we sending to people throughout the state or our tourists when they come through and they travel on local roads that are not in good shape? Job creation. Businesses locate in towns, villages, and cities. So they have a great interstate, but they come off that interstate and they come onto a local road system. If that's a mess, that doesn't provide incentive to locate in a town, village, or city. And if you want to talk about safety, a lot of people say, well, this doesn't get the attention as education does. Well, let me tell you, from an education perspective, how many of us put our kids or grandkids on a school bus every morning? God forbid one of those bridges or culverts or roads go out and we lose some people. I don't want to start an alarm, but we have $89 billion in unmet needs, and this could happen. It's happened before in other places, and the comptroller has said we have significant needs that are not being met. 32% of our bridges are deficient. 40% of our roads are poor or fair and getting worse. And I think people understand the investment in our local infrastructure. We need to make sure they expect their tax dollars to come back to help improve the local infrastructure, and they deserve to have that happen. And the governor cares about property tax relief. Every dollar you spend in the CHIPS program is one less dollar that comes from the local property taxpayer. And we talk about mandate relief for our local communities. That's mandate relief, in my opinion, because we're providing assistance to the community to fix their local infrastructure. And some of these towns, because CHIPS is the only money they have, with the tax cap, they can't make that investment. It can cost over $100,000 to pave a mile of road. I mean, that's very difficult on some of these local municipal budgets. And we just believe this investment is worthwhile. It's a safety reason. It's an economic development issue. It's for our farmers, wherever it may be. And TRIP is a national transportation agency that came out with a study that says it costs New York drivers, $25 billion a year annually, $25 billion yearly, and increased vehicle costs, miles, damage to your vehicles because of the condition of our roads. That's $2,300 per driver. So let's fix these roads and bridges. Let's make that investment, but let's make sure we're funding our local infrastructure, because the fact of the matter is 87% of the roads in New York State are owned and maintained by our local municipalities. 52% of the bridges are owned and maintained by our municipalities. And 48% of the miles are driven on our local roads. So we need to be a partner. They have to care for more of the infrastructure. And given the climate, we need to be a partner and partner with them and provide this funding directly to the local municipality, which will benefit the local property taxpayer.
So capital projects, obviously a major component of the state budget, but there are also others, among
Sure.
them education. There's been a lot of talk of closing the GEA, gap elimination aid. Where do things stand at this point on the GEA?
Well, the governor in his budget presentation said he wants to close it over 2 years. The Senate made it very clear in their statements that they're going to do it in 1 year this year, and that was what they said. I signed on to a letter in the Assembly, bipartisan letter, that said let's get rid of the GEA this year. I think it can happen. I think we're pretty close to doing that. Next week, we'll be doing our one house budget, so kind of set the parameters and the priorities for both houses, and then we'll be on our way to conference committees and wrapping up the budget. But I see no reason why we can't eliminate the GEA once and for all. Some schools, as proposed, have none left, but there are still others that do have some, and I think it's only fair that we get rid of it all this year, and then certainly we can move forward with a more fair and equitable education system for our kids.
What numbers are out there currently? Because the Assembly, Senate, and the governor each have their own numbers. What numbers are you seeing right now coming out of the hearings, the budget hearings, that the Assembly is looking at? Because there was talk that the Assembly overshot the governor's numbers in terms of budget spending.
Well, those are, I think, more revenue projections, but at the end of the day, all three sides are going to have to agree on what the revenue projections are. Again, the one house budget is a snapshot of what their priorities are as we move into the three-way budget negotiations between the Assembly, Senate, and the governor. But when it comes to education, I'm pretty optimistic that we can eliminate the GEA. And there's a whole host of issues. I mean, we're talking about other proposals. We need to, and I've said this over again, we got to improve the business climate. We got to create jobs in our state. And far and away, the business community is getting hit on the chin with increased regulations, and the tax climate, the business climate is certainly not favorable. We're 50th in business climate. We need to do a better job if we're going to encourage private sector investment back in this economy, which will create the jobs we need to provide the revenue, the tax revenue, to fund our important programs in this state.
The governor has been pushing minimum wage, which seems to be something that he's really passionate about. He's been launching a public advocacy campaign, if you will, to drum up support for minimum wage. You talk about the economy, and you talk about the importance of small businesses in New York State. In fact, I just read an article this morning talking about how much small businesses in New York provide to the state economy. What impact would raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour have on small businesses?
I think it would have a negative impact all across the board, and not just to our small businesses, certainly to our small business community. There's been some estimates that said it would cost small business community $16 billion a year. The governor is proposing $370 million in tax relief, saying that's going to offset it. That's not going to happen. That's not going to work. But it's not just the small business community. Our farmers, our agriculture community, $500 million impact. Think of a dairy farmer. They can't just go and increase the price of milk. It's fixed because it's a commodity. Think of our not-for-profits. Those who work with our developmentally disabled or work with people with disabilities. I met with one not-for-profit provider in my district. Their annual budget is $7 million. This proposal goes through and increase their budget by $1.5 million. This agency is really dependent on Medicaid reimbursement, but the governor's not proposing to increase the Medicaid reimbursement also. So where's that money going to come from? Our hospitals and nursing homes, same thing. There's no proposals to increase the Medicaid and Medicare reimbursement, which our hospitals and nursing homes are dependent upon. So where's the money going to come from? For our local school districts in our local governments, same thing.
Really quickly, we
Sure.
only have about 20 seconds left. Are you concerned that the governor is going to use minimum wage as leverage against the legislature when it comes to the budget?
I hope not, because I know he knows this is a divisive issue. We can deal with this outside the budget. The budget, this can be dealt with later, and it should be dealt with later. Let's get the budget done on time for the people we represent, and then we can deal with some of the more controversial issues later.
Always a pleasure to see you, Assemblyman.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure to see you folks at home. If you'd like to reach out to Assemblyman Phil Palmesano, you can do so by contacting his district office. The information is available on your screen, and you can also reach out to the Assemblyman on Facebook. Thank you very much for joining us today. Until next time, take care.